He had been waiting for this moment for what felt like an eternity. Every day for the past year, he had thought about her, wondering where she was and what she was doing. He had met her briefly at a party, but they had only talked for a few minutes before getting separated. He had never forgotten her bright blue eyes and her infectious laugh. And he had promised himself that he would find a way to see her again. Finally, the day of their long-awaited meeting had arrived. He arrived at the coffee shop early, his heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. He couldn't believe that he was finally going to see her again, after all this time. He ordered a coffee and took a seat by the window, trying to calm his racing thoughts. As he sat there, he saw her walk through the door. She was even more beautiful than he remembered. She spotted him immediately and walked over, a huge smile spreading across her face. "Hi," she said, extending her hand. "I'm so glad we were finally able to meet up again." He stood up and took her hand, feeling a jolt of electricity run through his body. "I know," he said, smiling back at her. "I've been thinking about this moment for a long time." They sat down at a table and chatted for what felt like hours, laughing and getting to know each other. The time passed by in a blur, and before they knew it, it was getting late. As they stood up to leave, he knew he couldn't let this moment pass without doing something he had been wanting to do for a long time. He turned to her and took her hand, gazing into her bright eyes. "I know this might sound crazy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't bear the thought of not seeing you again. Would you like to come home with me?" She looked at him for a moment, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Then she nodded, her eyes shining. "Yes," she said softly. "I would love to." They left the coffee shop hand in hand, feeling as if they were walking on air. He led her to his car and opened the door for her, his heart racing with excitement. As they drove through the city, he couldn't help but steal glances at her, marveling at how beautiful she was. They drove in silence for a long time, each lost in their own thoughts. He couldn't believe that she was finally sitting next to him, after all this time. He thought about all the moments they had shared, and all the moments they had yet to share. He knew that this was the start of something special, and he couldn't wait to see where their journey would take them. As they walked into his house, they were greeted by the warm glow of the fireplace. He led her over to the couch and they sat down, still holding hands. They continued to chat about all sorts of interesting topics, losing track of time as they deepened their connection. He was struck by her intelligence and her wit. And he found himself constantly impressed by her insights and her perspective on the world. She seemed to see things in a way that he had never considered before, and he found himself wanting to know more about her and her thoughts. As the night wore on, he knew that he had to find a way to impress her. He stood up and walked over to his bookshelf, scanning the titles until he found what he was looking for. He pulled out a thin volume and walked back to the couch, handing it to her with a flourish. "This is my favorite book," he said, his eyes shining with excitement. "I think you'll love it too. It's all about finding your place in the world and following your dreams, no matter what anyone else says." She took the book and looked at the cover, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "I've always loved books like this," she said, smiling up at him. "They always give me a sense of hope and inspiration, and I love the idea of following my dreams no matter what. It's something I've always struggled with, to be honest." He reached out and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I know how you feel," he said, his voice soft and sincere. "I've always had a hard time figuring out what I really want in life. And it can be so easy to get caught up in other people's expectations. But this book has really helped me see things in a different way, and I think it could do the same for you." She smiled at him and leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling a sense of comfort wash over her. She had always been a bit of a dreamer, and she loved the idea of living a life filled with purpose and passion. She knew that she still had a long way to go, but she felt like she was finally on the right path. She had always dreamed of finding someone who was as similar to her as possible, someone who shared her passions and her values, someone who could be a support in life at any difficult moment, and someone who would always be there for her. And as she sat there next to him, she knew that she had finally found that person. He was kind and compassionate, and he had a way of making her feel like the most important person in the world. She felt like they were two halves of a whole, and she knew that together, they could conquer anything. She looked up at him and smiled, feeling a wave of love wash over her. She looked up at him and smiled, feeling a wave of love wash over her. She knew that she had finally found the person who was meant for her, and she couldn't wait to see what the future held for them. After a moment, she gently asked him what he thought was the perfect girlfriend. She was curious to know what he valued in a relationship, and she wanted to make sure that she was meeting his expectations. He thought for a moment, a serious look on his face. To me, the perfect girlfriend is someone who is kind and compassionate, and who always puts others before herself, he said. She's someone who is intelligent and independent, and who isn't afraid to speak her mind. She's someone who is always there for me, no matter what, and who supports me in all my endeavors. And she's someone who is passionate about life, and who loves to try new things and experience new things. That's what the perfect girlfriend means to me. She smiled at him, feeling her heart swell with love. She knew that she was all of those things and more, and she was so grateful to have found someone who appreciated her for who she was. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Well, I'm glad to hear that," she said, a twinkle in her eye. "Because I think you're the perfect boyfriend too. You're kind, compassionate, and intelligent. You always put others before yourself, and you're always there for me. And you're so passionate about life, and I love that about you." He smiled at her and leaned in for a kiss, feeling a sense of happiness and contentment that he had never known before. He had been wanting to kiss her for what felt like an eternity, and he couldn't believe that the moment had finally arrived. As their lips met, he felt a surge of emotion wash over him. It was like a fire had been ignited inside of him, and he couldn't get enough. He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close, deepening the kiss as he lost himself in the moment. She felt herself melting into him, feeling a warmth and a tenderness that she had never known before. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, her heart racing with excitement. As they kissed, the world around them seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, lost in each other's embrace, and nothing else mattered. They were finally together, and they both knew that this was the start of something special.